From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips. I'm honored to have as our guest this week an old friend, a great American, Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. I had the privilege of meeting Congressman Paul on his first tour of duty in Washington in the 1970s. And planning for conservative victory or constitutional victory was something we had in mind even then. We worked together on something called a shadow government, which spelled out how the federal government ought to operate. I had the privilege of supporting the congressman in a statewide race that he made in Texas, and I voted for him with enthusiasm when he was a candidate for president on the Libertarian Party ticket in 1988. He is a man who has always been willing to show courage for his principles. He's a strong pro-lifer. Professionally, he's a doctor. He grew up in Pittsburgh. He graduated from Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania and the Duke University School of Medicine. He was a flight surgeon in the United States Air Force, and he gave up a successful private practice to come back to the Congress of the United States. Ron, I guess that's my first question. Are you a glutton for punishment?
I guess so.
You came here for a round. You were one of the early advocates of term limits. You imposed them on yourself, and you enjoyed life in the private sector. But even in the private sector, you kept fighting for what you believed. What caused you to decide to run again for Congress?
Well, it may seem strange, but I really think that I wanted to find out whether I could be reelected with all the evidence on the table. They knew exactly what I was all about. You know, I'd been in Congress, had a voting record, staked out a position, a modified libertarian position for the party, and I was just wondering if a person like myself could be reelected or brought back into the Congress. The first time it was different. I was seen as, you know, conventional, and then I was an incumbent. But now it was quite different, and they did run a very, very tough campaign against me. So it was that, but I've remained interested in public policy. I've had a newsletter. You know, I've had a newsletter while I was out. I was out for 12 years, went back to medical practice, had an educational foundation. I'm convinced that education is the most important thing long term, but some of us can achieve some educational benefits by being in Congress to draw attention to the very important issues.
Let's talk a little bit about the practical side. Your election should give hope to a great many people that it is possible to work within the system without abandoning your principles. You faced an incumbent congressman who had been a Democrat, who switched to the Republican Party, who enjoyed the full support of the Republican leadership nationally as well as in the state of Texas, and that meant giving him a powerful seat on the Ways and Means Committee so he could attract PAC dollars. He was given a lot of money by the Texas Republican leadership, by the national Republican leadership. Nonetheless, you were able to defeat him in a primary. What do you think was the reason for your success?
Well, I think the issues were important. But money is also important too. I mean, if I had had no money, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But raising the money was important. Since I couldn't raise PAC money, I was not independently wealthy, which means that we were testing how strong was our base.
So you had an independent base outside of the party system.
Yes, which the average challenger does not have. So the benefit of having been to Congress, having been involved in educational activities, had given me a base of 10, 12,000 people who are very, very interested, understood the issues, were constitutionalists, and were willing to really, really put out an effort. So that, in combination with, I believe it is very possible to attract a following by sticking to principle. Most members that I run into are worried about that because they see a vote as being negative politically. But, you know, you can't please everybody all the time, but you might be able to please a lot of people if you stick to a principle and they say, you know, he tells the truth. That in itself is a benefit because none of us ever agree entirely. But at least people will, if they know where you stand and you're going to vote, so even those who don't call themselves conservatives or libertarians will still vote for you because they don't trust the other guy. And I think that is probably the best way to overcome some of these political difficulties.
How much money was spent against you in the primary?
Well over $1 million, and some of the illegal money we'll never know.
And how much did you spend to win?
Probably a little bit less, but not much less. We did raise a lot of money, and we were able to compete, and that was probably what was their biggest surprise. They thought, well, he'll raise some money, but he can't compete with us. I mean, we run the party, and they had 72 donors from the Congress itself. I mean, the arm twisting was there.
Taking their own PACs and putting money.
Yes, they took their own PAC, and they said, this is a litmus test. We can't let our party building suffer. So their idea of party building was, of course, taking a guy that voted 68% of the time with Clinton, and to really object to somebody who may stake out a position as very, very conservative, libertarian.
You had to fight a two-front war. After a $1 million campaign in the primary, you were up against a very strongly funded Democrat. The Democrats, because of that primary, thought they might have a chance to take that seat. How much did they pour into the race?
Probably another $1 million.
Were you able to match that?
And we were able to match it. We at that time thought we would qualify for a nice sum from the Republican National Party, because I think it's like $65,000 or $70,000, because they always reserve that amount of money for the nominee of the party. But in this case, an exception was made, and they spent it in the primary. So technically, it wasn't quite proper. So it was spent in the primary, and they said, sorry, Ron, we've used up the money for the 14th district. You don't get any. So we then had to, do our own fundraising. And PACs, we got ideological PAC money, but very, very little business PAC money.
Ron, you don't look a bit older, but you came to Congress in the 70s, and now you're in Congress in the 90s. How is the Congress in the 90s different than it was then?
I guess the most shocking thing is that sometimes it's like deja vu all over again. You're there and they're same debates, same budgetary debates. With Graham Rudman back then, now what do we have? We have the new budget debate. So unfortunately, it's the same old stuff over and over again. But the big difference is that I am in a party which is the majority party. But from an ideological point of view, it doesn't help me a whole lot, because if the party doesn't do what's right, it's a lot harder to buck the Republican establishment. And that was the same way when we had a Republican or a Democrat president. If I would oppose a Democrat, I could rally the troops a lot easier. Today it's very difficult. If our party leadership is going in such a way that they're expanding government, it's very difficult. I mean, there's a lock on it, and it's not easy to break them loose from what the leadership tells them to do.
During your time in real life, between your terms in Congress, I'm sure you had the opportunity to reflect on your role. Now, I thought you were a very effective congressman on your first tour, because you took a stand that was an example to others. You were able to explain why you took the stands that you did, and your presence in Congress gave hope to people all over the country and became a rallying point for various causes. You were really the first member of Congress in the modern era to talk intelligently about honest money, for example, and I think it really had an impact in changing the debate in America. How do you see your role now? Is it any different than it was then?
No, not a whole lot different. I see my role as trying to set the best example and to keep emphasizing the Constitution, our oath of office, talking about the doctrine of enumerated powers and what the 9th and 10th Amendment means. And you're generous, but I'd expect you to be about saying that I was effective. But interestingly enough, and you wouldn't be surprised, that that's the opposite term is what they use against me all the time. Ron Paul, it won't be any good because he's ineffective. He's incapable of trading votes. So how's he going to get our stuff? I mean, we need our stuff.
Well, so many people in Congress on the Republican side have accepted the predicate of the Democratic argument. They have accepted the idea that the government is God walking on earth. The government knows what's best for us, and government that can spend our money better than we can do it ourselves. Government can tell us how to live our lives better than we can ourselves. And so they therefore accept the democratic theory of justice, that you've got to do these things. Now, I don't know when this show is going to be broadcast, but during the week that we're taping, I was proud to see that you were, I wish there had been more, but you were the only Republican member of Congress who voted against more money for public housing. Now, there was a time when not a single Republican would be so left-wing as to support the notion that housing is a federal government responsibility. But now, thank God you were there to say, stop, wait, this is wrong. But why weren't there more with you?
Because they
interpret
it as saying, well, we're doing, yes, we might agree with Ron Paul that we shouldn't be in public housing, but we are, and we have to just change things gradually. We have to have block grants and local bureaucrats disseminated throughout the land, you know, and that'll be our step in the right direction. And that's the hardest argument to break. But your point is well taken, and that is the Republicans, when they do this, endorse the philosophic principle of the Democrats. I think they've totally lost. You can't win that way. And it is true, they're never going to accept the purity of my principle and say, yes, we must have an absolutely free society, because we don't expect that. But somebody has to say it, because otherwise you can never make an attempt to come in our direction, because they concede the principle. And the principle is that government force can be used to mold people and mold society and mold the economy, mold the world. And as long as we grant easily to the government this power and we reject the restraint of power of the Constitution, there's no hope. And that's terrible to think about, because we should be hopeful. The Republicans are in charge for the first time in 40 years, and all these positive things because the people want change. I'm more hopeful what the people are demanding, but they haven't demanded that the Republicans come here and endorse the same principle that the Democrats endorse. That's a real fundamental problem, and we have to be able to state, you know, with clarity of what we believe in.
You know, I think a lot of the problems arise from the fact that members of Congress, understandably wanting to be reelected, don't think they can get away with doing what their conscience and their mind tell them is correct. And my prayer is that by your explaining these issues to them, more and more of them will say, yeah, that makes sense. I can get away with that. I can explain that to my constituents.
Yeah, let's hope so. And it might be said, well, you know, so-and-so's in a strongly Republican district. Oh, I'm not. I'm in a 50-50 district, so I do have to explain. And I do think that if you're consistent and honest and straightforward, that's worth something too. But I don't know whether they're going to get that courage or not. There are some districts, I guess, if you voted against public housing, it would be an automatic default.
I'm not sure there are that many. I think,
but you know,
I think your point is correct, that people are looking for someone who will act on principle regardless of the personal consequences.
But you know what's going in our direction, and I argue this too. It'd be great if we could win it on the Constitution and moral arguments, which is, you know, obviously very important. But now, and this again goes back to your question, why am I motivated now? I'm motivated now because I think we're approaching a financial crisis, that we've spent beyond our means, that the dollar's weaker than anybody believes, that this budget's way out of control, and these things aren't going to work, and taxes are going to go up. And so this process continues. And now we have the financial argument on our side. Where are they going to get the money? Yeah, well, they can keep voting for all this public housing, but what are they going to do? Print the money? Taxes more? Borrow more? So the finances finally bring us to a halt. You know, we did not have to invade the Soviet Union to break it up. It was, as Mises said, it was the collapse and the failed policy of the socialist system that made the Soviets collapse. And that's what's going to happen here. The welfare state, we have to argue morally and constitutionally, but we have to be prepared for the disintegration of the welfare warfare state, and then we have to be available in order to put something in its place.
We'll be right back with Congressman Ron Paul right after these messages. Please stay with us. Hello, I'm Howard Phillips. The Conservative Caucus has been actively fighting since 1974 for less expensive government and lower taxes imposed upon the American people by the federal government. If you want to become part of our effort to reduce the size and cost and regulatory burden of the federal government. I hope you will call the number shown on your screen.
For more information about the Conservative Caucus, write us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia 22180, or call 703-938-9626. Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips. Our guest for this broadcast is Congressman Ron Paul, Republican of Texas. Ron, during the previous discussion, you were pointing out quite correctly, I believe, the threat to the American economy posed by runaway government spending. One of the most important things you've done in Congress is explain the dangers of funny money. As you well know, from 1787 to 1913, we did not have a central bank, except for those periods with the first and second bank of the United States. But even then, we had more or less a constitutional money system. In that period of time, cumulatively, inflation was only about 17% over 126 years. Since 1913, it's been more than 1,000%.
Right.
And I think one could argue correctly that the Fed taxes the American people more than the Congress does by devaluing the dollars they earn and the dollars they hold without any accountability to the people.
That's right. A lot of people don't understand exactly why inflation is a tax and why it's so unfair. If you dilute the money supply, increase the money supply, the value goes down, prices go up, and that is a tax. That's how the government gets around it. So the Fed accommodates congressional big spending. But the unfair part about it is not everybody suffers equally. You know, if every one of us suffered 1% loss per month evenly across the board, it wouldn't be so bad. But inflation wipes out eventually the middle class, and it's very, very detrimental to the low-income people. So all liberal do-gooders, these bleeding hearts, all should be for sound money, because the people they want or claim they want to help could best be helped by having a sound currency.
In the early days of the labor movement, Samuel Gompers and others understood that.
Was a gold
and
standard
they fought
person.
for sound money.
Right.
But now big labor has bought into the whole socialist scheme.
That's right, and they want always to have Congress a way of financing. So if they can't borrow enough money, they are going to go to the Fed, and the Fed will monetize it and create the money. So it probably wasn't an accident, the fact that in 1913, the same year they gave us the Federal Reserve, they gave us an income tax, and they also significantly changed our foreign policy, where we started this Woodrow Wilson protect the world and save democracy and make the world safe.
And for the first time, an unconstitutional draft was introduced in the context of World War I. Absolutely no basis for it in the Constitution. It was challenged in the Supreme Court, but they ducked it because it was a political question. But clearly, when they went from American Expeditionary Force to calling people up and sending them overseas, a fundamental change in our political system occurred.
It should be called slavery, involuntary servitude.
Well, it violates the 13th Amendment, which prohibits involuntary servitude.
Yeah, and you know, the argument that I always resented the most was, you know, if you're 18-year-old, you owe it to your country. I always wondered why. The guy that was 58 and had $1 million and hadn't served, why doesn't he owe more to this country? Maybe he should be on the front line. The 18-year-old didn't get anything yet. Well, of course, he has to go and risk his life.
Of course, whether the issue is education or military service, the fundamental question is, who owns us? Do the parents have prior responsibility for the child, a prior claim on the child they brought into the world, or does the government own the child?
Well, unfortunately, the government's winning out, whether it's permission to a 15-year-old to have an abortion. The government's given permission the entire time. I mean, it is assumed that the government is in control. Look at the tax system. The tax system, the whole concept of the income tax assumes they own all of you and they'll permit you to keep a certain percentage. And then, even after we work hard, save our money, and invest, if we sell something, we have to share our profits with the government. Then if we die, we can't even give it to our kids without saying, well, we're part owners with the government. We have to give the government this much. We get to keep this much. So there's another example of where you have to state the principle. They don't get anything. They shouldn't get anything because they're not part owners in our life and our families. And yet, so often they'll say, well, maybe it's 30%. We ought to settle for 28%, and think it's a great victory.
Ron, we're in a period of significant change in the world, and a lot of it is the result of the surrender by Congress, not by you, but by your colleagues, of authority which the Constitution assigns to the Congress. Congress has passed that authority on, not just to institutions domestically, regulatory agencies, civil service, nonprofit corporations, the judiciary, the president, the Fed. They've also passed on policy-setting authority to international institutions, World Bank, International Monetary Fund. The dollar and its value in the world is manipulated by many of these unaccountable institutions, including the Fed. But we now see a situation where our chickens may come home to roost. Because the dollar has been the reserve currency of the world, our profligacy in terms of our indebtedness, our overspending, et cetera, has been borne. The pain of it has been borne by other countries. But we see the European community moving towards something called the euro, replacing domestic currencies. It's possible that the dollar may no longer be the reserve currency of the world 10 or 20 years out. What will that portend for us?
Well, that's the issue that I try to study on a daily basis, because I think that is where the final collapse is going to come. It's going to be over the dollar when the trust in the dollar is lost. Really and truly, there's not much about the dollar that we should trust. Because we do spend, we do hear a lot of complaint because of our balance of trade, but actually the imbalance of trade, our negative balance, means that foreigners are foolish enough to take our money, and they're really financing our inflation. They're buying treasury bills. I mean, last year the foreign central banks took in over $105 billion of our debt, so they are financing our debt. And we buy cars, we do everything. They take our money and they're holding it. But periodically, they notice that they have too many. In 1971, they did. Gold was $35 an ounce. There was a collapse of the Bretton Woods, radical adjustments, inflation of the 1970s. In the end of the 1970s, we had the same kind of problem, dumping of dollars, gold soaring to $700, $800. I think the bubble is bigger. So when they come in and they restore some bit of confidence, it means that they've sort of patched the bubble. The bubble keeps getting bigger and bigger. So now the debt is bigger. Our national debt is bigger. Our foreign debt is bigger. Our domestic debt, consumer debt is bigger. So they've been able to keep it together. But the day when they lose significant confidence in the dollar is when you're going to see really ramifications in the currency markets, the stock markets, and we're going to see domestic inflation.
So it's really a question of legitimacy and credibility for the dollar. The dollar is really a piece of rag with green ink on it, and it's proclaimed to have a certain value. It's proclaimed to be a store of value. But when people say there's something better or more trustworthy, then it could collapse overnight.
That's right. And they, go ahead.
We're going to have to take a break, and we'll finish this part of our conversation during the next session. And what I'd like you to do, since I think we both agree about the danger we face, is give me some thoughts on what individual Americans can and should do to protect themselves and their families against what could be a major economic collapse. Please stay with us. We'll be back with Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Hi, I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus. I'm inviting you to learn more about the Conservative Caucus, a grassroots public policy action organization that was founded in 1974. Whether you're opposed to socialized medicine, interested in making Congress more accountable, stopping the New World Order, fighting gun control, reducing taxes, or restoring America to its biblical premises and constitutional boundaries, we're the organization you're looking for. Please call the number on your screen to get more information about our work.
For more information, write the Conservative Caucus, 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, or call 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips. We've been privileged to have as our guest for this broadcast Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Ron, do you have a phone number people can call for more information about your activities?
Yes, I do, if I can remember.
Well, if you can't, it's on the screen.
Yeah, that 888 number?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good number.
It's on the screen. But we were talking about your advice. Now, you've been a physician, you've given medical advice, but you're really an economic physician as well. What economic advice would you give to our viewers?
Well, I think it's very important that we all are aware of what's happening and the potential danger. I think people ought to have skills to be able to take care of themselves and their family. They ought to have a place to live if they have to, and be out of debt. If they can have something away from a big city, I think that's very important. But I think ultimately the real test is to be able to defend themselves financially and physically. That means they ought to have some gold and some silver, because if the money does do what I think it will someday, they ought to have some, some insurance against that, as well as owning a weapon. It's terrible to have to say, but people will maybe have to defend their family.
It's been done throughout history. Christ advised it. Others have advised it throughout history.
Ultimately, though, we all have to invest, as you've invested so much of your time and energies, into defending a free society, defend the Constitution. Because if we live in a free society and it's poor for a while, we will become wealthy again. So without our freedoms, all these other things are going to be very, very shaky for protecting us. So I invest a lot of time and energy in promoting what I see as my vision of a free society, and I think that's crucial. You deserve a lot of thanks for all the work you've done.
Well, in the course of defending the free society, you haven't neglected your family either. How many children do you have, Ron?
We have five children and a bunch of grandchildren.
At least 11, maybe
yeah, 11,
more.
11, maybe get two more one of these days.
Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Please come again for another broadcast of Conservative Roundtable.